warming up your vehicle. Some of you have asked after my last video talking about Dave's Auto Center and his whole fiasco on the things that he's got himself into and drawn himself into with bad customer service and stuff like that, and the recent video with his secret sauce and talking about how you shouldn't be warming up your vehicle. And anyway, I'm kind of, like I said, I'm a proponent in that regard, to where most of what he said was correct. But there are some specifics where he's not correct. And you guys asked me in the comment section to cover what would allot you to warm up your vehicle other than personal issues, personal gain. What I mean by personal gain is like, oh, I want it to be comfortable inside. Well, that's a personal thing. That's not necessarily healthy for the vehicle. It's your personal preference, which ultimately you're the owner of that vehicle. You do what you want. It's going to be your money when it breaks down, or if anything breaks because of you doing X, Y, Z. I get that. And if that's your mindset completely and entirely, and you don't want to know why you should or shouldn't warm up your vehicle, then this video is not for you, and you shouldn't leave a single comment in this comment section. You should be moved forward with your next video. Because if you tell me that you're going to do what you want to do because that's how you want to do it, and you don't leave any kind of good substance and information in the comment section, you're going to be immediately blocked. I just don't have time for the shenanigans. Now, why would you warm up your vehicle? I've wrote a list here of things on why you would. First is oil flow. Oil flows better when it's warmer. Even though it has a thicker rating when it's warm, and a lower rating, or a thinner rating, when it's cold. It's because of the viscosity index improvers that are built into the oils, the chemical makeup of it. So oil flow is one thing. Flows better when it's warm. Transmission shifting. Some transmissions don't like temperatures extremely low, and then you just going out there starting them, letting them run for a minute, and then trying to take off. They don't like that. I know my Ford, my F-150, if it gets down to like 10 degrees, 0 degrees and below, it'll scream at me for like the first quarter mile before it wants to shift right. It'll hold the shifts longer, and it'll kind of shift kind of hard in one or two of the gears. And it's got, you guys know how I maintain that thing. It's meticulously taken care of. It's got new fluid every 20 to 30,000 miles in it. It's got a new filter every 40,000 miles. I meticulously take care of that transmission. It's probably looks like it just came off the showroom floor internally, like never been used. But it will still bark at me if it's too cold outside and I don't let it run for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes before taking off. When it's cold down, I want to say like 10 to 15 degrees and below, if I don't let it run for about 4 or 5 minutes, that transmission doesn't like me. IWEs, the integrated wheel ends, the hub actuators, the ones that are vacuum released. Sometimes they'll get stuck in an outward position, and it needs to sit there and warm up 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever, in order for some of that heat from the engine to be generated kind of down there in that lower engine compartment, wheel well area, and it will slowly pull those IWEs just from the residual heat coming off and the vacuum being built up in the reservoir for the IWE reservoir. There's a vacuum reservoir. And some manufacturers say that they actually don't release the IWEs because it takes a couple minutes to build up sufficient vacuum to release the IWEs. So you, at least when it's super cold, I want to say, again, 10 degrees, 0 degrees and below, my IWEs will not unlock right away. After the first, second, or third stop, if I just start it up and go, it takes some movement. And what that what that results in, or the result of that, is either the grease inside the IWEs wore out, and these are brand new, so I can tell you that's not the problem, or the IWE itself is just frozen. That's what it comes down to. It gets frozen, it gets stuck. And it needs sometimes sitting there idling with vacuum pulled on it in order for it to kind of pull past that really thick grease and pull it back in and release it from the hub, or else it'll be screaming at you. It'll almost sound like a transmission pump when you go forward and them IWEs are stuck in two-wheel drive. Sounds terrible. Vacuum pumps. Vacuum pumps, when they're extremely cold, a lot of vacuum pumps have rubber paddles on the end of the rotor that spins around. and that rubber shrinks with cold. So it will pull back some of the efficiency of the vacuum that's built, especially with some of the GM vehicles like 2011, 2012 and up that had an issue with, especially 2015, 2016, 17, 18, Sierras, Silverados, Yukons, Cadillacs. They had an issue with their vacuum pumps that had to be replaced because they would become wore out or defective early on. And you'd get a super hard brake pedal, and then it slowly creep down to normal, and then get hard again, and then go down to normal. And in a lot of cold weather, it would be more prominent that this would go on than when it would be warm outside. Those paddles inside that scrape the side of the cylinder wall as it's creating vacuum, they end up shrinking, and they don't make contact anymore like they're supposed to, and they actually wear out as well. So that would be another reason why warming up would be a good idea. So there's some heat generated inside that pump, and those paddles expand more so they can create the proper vacuum for your braking system, or your IWEs, whatever it may be. What would be another reason why you'd warm up your vehicle is if you've been negligent on your maintenance and you haven't been changing your trans filter, at an appropriate interval every 40, 50,000 miles if you have a trans filter, or you haven't been servicing your transmission enough every 40, 50,000 miles, you could have some buildup inside that trans filter, and when the oil is super cold, there will be no proper flow, and it won't move, or it'll bang into gears and stuff like that, and the oil needs to actually warm up a little bit more to actually get through that filter and do its job, because the filter's inadequate, or you haven't been servicing the vehicle properly, or there's actually a mechanical issue with the system itself. And with warm oil, it's not as profound as with cold oil. So that would be another reason why you would warm up your vehicle. Let's talk about how long to warm up the vehicle, though. In the Midwest here where I'm at in Illinois, it typically gets down to about 10 degrees, 15 degrees. Sometimes we'll see 0, maybe a little under 0. But normally it's about 10 degrees to like 30 degrees in the wintertime here. And I notice about 3 to 4 minutes of idling, just warming up. Then my high idle will kick down, 5 minutes max. I'm ready to go. Like a month ago when I got down to like negative 15, I had to let that truck sit out there and run for like 7 minutes before the high idle would even kick down. And even once it kicked down, I got like a half mile from the house, and my coolant temperature was perfect. It was down, I was getting warm air out of the vents and stuff like that, but my trans temperature was struggling. It did not want to warm up because it was so cold outside, and it took like another half mile for it to actually start to get the needle to move on the trans temp. I'm like, man, if I would have just sat out there and idled in that negative weather, that truck would have sit there running and running and running, and the coolant temperature would have been up to par, but the trans temp would have taken 3 or 4 times as long as it did. So in super cold climates, you may need a little bit more idle time than in like more moderate, cold climates like where I'm at. 10 to 20 degrees, 30 degrees, that's nothing. 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes max of sitting there warming up, and you're ready to take off. For the most part, most gasoline vehicles are ready to go. Diesels could probably go up to about 7 to 10 minutes if you really wanted to in high idle mode. If you don't know how to high idle mode your diesel, then it's typically something to do with cruise controls, or you're going to have to add something into the system to actually get it to high idle. Having the engine under a little bit of a load is critical with diesels to get them up to operating temperature efficiently. Now, again, climates, 10 degrees, 15, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, I would say 4 or 5 minutes of idle time is more than sufficient in most cases. I just did a video on TikTok not too long ago where we were talking about this, and there was some controversy, and I got in a 2024, it was either 2022, 2024 Tiguan with a 2-liter turbo, and it was something like 17 or 13 degrees outside, something like that. And within the first minute of that vehicle in its high idle strategy, with how it operates, I already had warm air coming out of the vents. And 3 minutes later, everything was completely warm. The engine, transmission fluid and stuff, it was ready to go. High idle kicked down. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy, man. This little small 4-cylinder, within a minute, it was ready to go, really. 3 minutes, completely warmed up and kind of warm. And it was ready to go. So depending on your vehicle and the idle strategy, most of the time you only need 3, 4, 5 minutes of running time, especially if your temperature never gets down below 10 degrees. Once you start getting closer to 0 degrees, -10, -20, now we're talking about, probably pushing 7 to 8, 9 minutes of idle time to get it some warmth build up, ready to leave, ready to roll. But once you start getting down in the -40, -70 degrees, like I was watching a video from the Arctic the other day, those guys were saying these vehicles will not operate in this -50, -60, -70 degree weather. And they were showing these people that lived out in the middle of this like glacier or something, or this it was nothing but white snow around them, and they had to literally freeze their food and stuff outside and take it in piece by piece in order to eat. They live like minimalists, and they were going out there to start their vehicle, and they had to have a tarp over the entire vehicle, so when it did snow and stuff like that, the snow would help hold the tarp down. And then they had to take a torpedo heater and then pull it up under the side of the tarp and turn the torpedo heater on like full blast and let it warm up just enough underneath that to where it would start to get the engine pan and stuff like that and everything else nice and somewhat warm in order to even start the vehicle. And then it still had to sit there and run for a little bit with block heaters and everything else on. So those people that's a different animal. That's something that most of us can't speak for because we don't live in that. And those people know how to do what they need to do to get through and get by. And they typically drive older vehicles that are very rugged, that last hundreds of thousands of miles. And not these newer vehicles. These newer vehicles probably wouldn't make it in those climates. They drive like older Land Rovers or Range Rovers or whatever the heck they are. Land Cruisers, older Toyotas, older Mercedes. A lot of diesel stuff. But anyhow, that's a completely different animal. And that when they were like talking about the engine's like molasses, like it's like jelly. In those -50, -60, -70 degree temperatures, you got to do all kinds of tricks to get the vehicle to run. You can't just take off right away in that kind of climate. But we don't live in that. Most of us here across the United States, we only see temperatures maybe down to like -10, somewhere around there, 0, which doesn't allot a lot of idle time. 5 to 6 minutes, 7 minutes in worst case scenario ish, and then take off. Me here, it gets down to about 10 degrees, maybe 0 sometimes, and I literally let the truck run 3 or 4 minutes in the morning and I'm gone. So there are some reasons why you should idle the vehicle a little bit before you take off. Most of us don't have to idle the vehicle that long. Even diesel trucks don't have to idle the vehicle that long. So, and there's a lot of guys on here that I've spoke to that they have diesel trucks. They have, your Fords and your Rams and stuff like that, and they have Kenworths and Peterbilts. And a lot of them say, I can't just let my truck sit in the driveway and idle without a block heater hooked up and get up to operating temp. It just won't happen. If I don't hook my block heater up, I've got to run that truck probably for a good 10, 15 minutes before anything moves on the dash at all. And then I have to go drive it to get it up to operating temperature, because it will not get to operating temperature just sitting in my driveway in the wintertime. Not without a block heater hooked up. So there are some takeaways here, and people talk about fuel dilution. When a vehicle's just sitting there idling when it's cold, and it takes forever for it to get up to operating temperature, you don't have rings where the windows have completely closed. So you're getting some fuel down there in that oil, kind of diluting it a little bit. And it takes several miles of driving in order to burn off any of that dilution at all. And you're not even going to burn off everything completely. So you got to figure out the climate that you're in and the happy balance that you need to, let's get the vehicle running a little bit before I take off in the morning for work or whatever. I don't need to be out here excessively doing it. I need to be sensible about it. I know my transmission doesn't like me if I don't let that vehicle run for at least 4 or 5 minutes, 6 minutes. And that's what I operate my strategy off of, because I know I maintain my vehicle. I've done everything properly. I'll let it run for about 5 minutes before I take off, and then I'm just going to slowly take off until it gets up to operating temperature. But if you come on here and you're like, oh, I'm doing it because the cabin needs to be completely warm and stuff like that, whatever, man. I'm not talking to you. I don't have a reason to talk to you. I go out there and I scrape my window like a big boy, clean everything off, let the vehicle run a little bit until it gets some warmth, put the heat on max, and within 5 minutes I'm ready to roll. Even in the worst conditions, about 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, I'm ready to roll. There ain't no reason for me to let it sit out there and run for 20, 30 minutes. That's absolutely ludicrous. But again, everybody has their own preference on why they want to do what they do. You figure that out, and I hope this video has at least somewhat helped you guys understand that I acknowledge the need for some warm-up and idling. But it's not necessary all the time, and there are some reasons why you shouldn't do it at all. And that's my take on it. Leave your thoughts down below. And if you're one of those people that are like, oh, it's because I need it to be warm for my comfort and stuff like that, and it's nothing about the vehicle itself, then don't leave a comment. Just move on. Thank you guys. Be blessed.